Stephen, how's it going? Thank you for being here, my friend. So, yeah, I was thinking maybe there's not going to be very many people here tonight because a lot of people might be doing stuff. Friday night, 3rd of July, but it is what it is. So, I mean, hopefully the people who join who are followers of Christ are not not off doing 4th of July festivities unless they're doing some evangelism. But yeah, so here we are to talk about my conversation with Alex Soren. Had a conversation with Alex Soren a few nights ago on his live stream. He did a live stream after his he had a sola scriptura debate with a Protestant guy. I can't remember the guy's name, but I saw a little bit of the debate, not very much. But then afterwards, Alex had sort of a debate after party and invited people to come on and challenge him on sola scriptura. And so I decided to go on and talk to him. I didn't have anything sola scriptura related to talk to him about, but so let me get the video ready here. Should have already had it ready. Okay. All right. So I come in about 26 minutes in. I think. No. I come in. Where do I come in? Oh, maybe that's the wrong. Sorry, that's the wrong video. Sorry, guys. I'm technologically challenged, and my live streams do not run as smoothly as the big cool YouTube guys. And my computer lags. All right, here we go. Getting there. Oh, wait a second. What am I doing? I am clueless. Totally clueless. All right, let me go. Come on. Sorry, I'll have it up in just a second here. Where is it? There it is. Come on. All right. Got it. Thank you for bearing with me and being patient. So yeah, I called in to try. Chris Sadowski, how you doing, my friend? Nice to see you here. Thank you for being here. Who else is here? 6 people. Anybody else I know? So let me just take this night light thing off. Got a blue light filter on. Just want to turn that off real quick before we get into the video. All right. Here we are. All right, so okay, I want to present, share screen, entire screen, share audio. Boom. Okay. Let's see here. All right, there it is. Okay, so yeah, before we get into this, like the conversation didn't go. It was 1 a.m. and I was pretty tired, and I saw that he was on a live stream, and I thought, why don't I give it a shot? I'd been wanting to try to talk to him, and that's when he was on, and so I went for it and was able to get on. But I just wasn't very, like, succinct. I wasn't very I took a little bit too much time to kind of work up to my question, and I never really got to very clearly present the question and the point that I was trying to make, which was basically basically that there's something strange about the Eastern Orthodox Church, in that they will excommunicate for a variety of reasons that Jesus and the apostles never said to excommunicate. If somebody becomes Arian, if somebody is a modalist, if somebody, refuses to engage in icon veneration and other things. But there are certain things the New Testament explicitly says to excommunicate over, like greed, for example, which just sort of seems to not be on the radar. So I tried to challenge him about the Patriarch of Moscow, who I think it's pretty clear he's got a problem with greed. And anyway, and not just that, the issue with his encouraging the war in Ukraine, and these are things that I think it's pretty obvious the early church would excommunicate people over. But the Eastern Orthodox Church doesn't seem to take those things very seriously. You can be a leader in good standing with the church, and you can bless Orthodox soldiers who go off to war, where the early Christians would have said, you can't do that. You can't go kill your enemies, or certainly not other Christians, and you're not allowed to do that as a follower of Christ, and you're going to be excommunicated if you do that. And if you want to be baptized and you're a soldier, then you have to commit you'll never use the sword again. And that's not how it is today in the Eastern Orthodox, the Catholic, or the Protestant churches. Things that Jesus talked about that were extremely important to him are just not, they're peripheral at best, often in all three churches. And so that was my point that I wanted to talk about with him. Like, why is it that they'll be quick to excommunicate over something like Arian doctrine, but won't excommunicate over something that Paul explicitly said to excommunicate over? That was sort of where I was going with it. And anyway, but let's see. We'll just watch where. So I think it's a pretty short conversation, and it only goes on for about 13 minutes. So I was thinking that we would just watch the whole thing. Maybe I'll speed it up a little bit, like 1.25 speed or something like that, and then we could go back through it. Not sure if that's the best way to do it. If it would be better to just stop along the way and just go through it once. Not really sure if anybody has any opinions or thoughts about that. If it wasn't so short, of course I'd just go through it once. But anybody have any thoughts on that? Should we go through it one time uninterrupted? Maybe a little bit, have it sped up a little bit to probably be a little I don't know, a little less than 10 minutes of a listen. Then we can stop, go through it again, and stop and chat about it. Or Anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay. Looks like not. So maybe, we're losing people. I am skilled at losing people. Very good at that. All right, well, I guess we'll just go through it, and I guess we'll just go through it once. Okay, let me just make sure you guys can hear this.
If in the improper hands, it's powerful. Let's go with Al.
Can you guys hear that? All right, we'll just assume you can hear it. Here we go.
Albin, what's up, Albin?
Hey, Alex.
How you doing?
I'm okay. How you doing tonight?
And before I say anything else, part of the reason why I want to talk about this is that, first of all, Alex Soren is a brilliant guy, very knowledgeable, very sharp, very good at debate. And I watched him interact with another guy who's pretty sharp, pretty smart, and he just did extremely well. And certainly do not want to attack Alex himself. I think there are a couple times where he may have deflected a little bit, but the point that I want to make here is that when it comes to the things that the Orthodox are interested in, the theological issues that they think are important, he is very well versed, very well read, it seems to me, and he has some good arguments. He's very good at debating, even on a subject that I think the evidence, in my opinion, the evidence very clearly is leaning in the other direction. The evidence for icon veneration in the early church is very, very weak, in my opinion. But there are Orthodox guys who can talk about that and make a really good philosophical case. They can use some of the evidence that there is, which is a little ambiguous. It could imply something, but doesn't actually say explicitly that the church was doing this. And they can work with it, and they can make it sound pretty strong. And he's very good at that. And so he's a very smart guy, very knowledgeable. I think he really believes this stuff. He's sincere in his desire to bring people to Eastern Orthodoxy. And but when it comes to some of the really simple things that Jesus talked about that were really important to Jesus, that's where I think Alex is a little bit out of his wheelhouse and is not sure. He's not aware of what the church taught early on, and and that's just how it often is with Catholics, Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox. Things that Jesus emphasized as of most important are often just not really in the category of things that we study and think about deeply. They're sort of not really on the radar, and so I think that comes out a little bit in this conversation. As brilliant as he is, I think he's just has to think about some of the subjects that come up here. Okay, here we go.
So far, so good. A little tired, but excited. I think it was a good debate. I think it was entertaining and educational, which is the goal. So,
yeah, I didn't see very much of it, but from what I did see, it seemed like it was not going too well for your opponent.
That's my takeaway too. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of questions, and I don't really have any.
Just before, we do have other people in the queue, so we can take all the questions, but let's just remember to be to the point.
Yeah. Well, my questions, I guess maybe I'll have just one or two.
Sure.
It's nothing about sola scriptura.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a question about the the situation with you said you're not under the Russian jurisdiction,
I'm
right?
Romanian. Yeah.
You're
I'm
Romanian.
in the
Okay.
Romanian jurisdiction.
Okay. So I wonder what you think about the Patriarch of Moscow, and now what is your relationship with him and the Russian Church? Or are
We
you
are in
guys?
communion.
You're in communion. Okay.
Yes.
He excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople, right?
No, he is not commemorating him in the diptychs. So there is no schism. It's like the first step in the people call it a schism, but it's the first step in the dispute resolution process. Last I checked, lay people can still, like, if you're a lay Russian Orthodox, you can still receive the communion at a Greek Orthodox church, and if you're Greek Orthodox, you can still receive communion at a Russian Orthodox church. It's on the clergy level.
Yeah.
Clergy.
Okay. So, so that's. I guess I'll stop there. So I'm still a little unclear on this, because the things that I've read online, from my understanding, I mean, there's some. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what to think of what Alex just said there. He says the Patriarch of Moscow has not excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople, but this is the first step in the dispute resolution process, which sounds a little bit like trying to make it sound better than what it actually is. From what I've read, the Patriarch of Moscow has said that no one under his authority is allowed to take the sacraments in churches that are under the authority of the Patriarch of Constantinople. So you can't get baptized, married, you can't take the Eucharist. If you're a Russian Orthodox, you're not allowed to take the sacraments in those Greek churches. But the Patriarch of Constantinople has not done the same thing in the other direction. He's, everyone under his authority, including the laity, is allowed to take the sacraments in Russian churches. It sounds like that's what's happening. So there's and then everyone, all of the other patriarchs and jurisdictions are still in communion with both Russia and Constantinople, and so they're kind of holding it together. But there's what seems like a schism, at least from one direction, Russia to Constantinople. That's what it seems like to me. And it might not constitute a schism according to how the Orthodox Church defines that. But when you look at what Paul has to say about schisms in the church, in 1 Corinthians and other places, I think it's pretty clear. He would consider this a schism. Any kind of argument, debate where believers are not in agreement with each other, not in harmony with each other, or if there are cliques in the church, and some people are saying, I follow this guy and I follow that guy, or if there is, if there's inequality when it comes to wealth, so that some people are not as wealthy as others, but they're suffering, they're needy, while other believers are doing fine. He would consider those schisms. He would consider those divisions. And so there's a whole lot of I've been looking into what's going on, everything that has happened since this conflict or tension or whatever you want to call it in the Orthodox Church has been going on. and all the kinds of it's really ugly. It's gotten pretty ugly. And it may not constitute a theological rift of the kind that happened, between the East and West. But if Paul was here, he would be extremely concerned about schisms, about divisions happening in the church if he were to consider the Eastern Orthodox Church to be the church. I don't think there's any doubt that he'd be talking about schisms and divisions. So anyway, let's keep going here, and maybe at some point, like the story of everything that's happened since this thing blew up, with the church in Ukraine and the Patriarch of Moscow and the Patriarch of Constantinople recognizing the autonomy of the church in Ukraine, and then the Patriarch of Alexandria recognizing their autonomy. I think I'm using the right vernacular. And the way the Patriarch of Moscow has responded to that is just unbelievable. Like, unbelievable that this kind of stuff could be going on in a community that claims to be the church. It's pretty bad, but maybe we'll get into that on another stream. Let's keep going here.
Pretty level, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. My question is, it seems like he's got some pretty serious problems with his character.
Patriarch Kirill.
Yeah.
I don't think I am in a position to judge him on his character. But I mean, if you're talking about like his blessing to the soldiers and stuff, there's the history of that. Like, we don't like war in the Orthodox Church, but we will bless our boys if they have to go off to war.
Just an interesting comment there. We don't like war in the Orthodox Church, but we will bless our boys if they have to go off to war. And there's nothing. Like, who wouldn't agree with that? Like, what church wouldn't agree with that? Probably most Muslims would feel that way about war. Jews, most unbelievers would feel that way. Like, yeah, I don't like war, but if the people on my side need to go fight a war, then yeah, I'm gonna support them if I think the cause is just. So there's just like there's nothing about that perspective on war, that approach to war, that is any different from how the world thinks about it. But it's very different. It was very different in the early centuries. You wouldn't hear somebody like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, guys like that early on. You wouldn't hear them say something like that. Like, yeah, we prefer not to go to war, obviously, but if our Christian men have to go off to war, then we'll bless them and support them in that. It's not how it was, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, well, the two areas that are kind of shocking to me are, there's the issue of the war, where you've got Orthodox Christians on both sides killing each other.
It's a tragedy. That's demons at play.
Yeah, and instead of pleading with them to cease, because Christ told us to love each other as he has loved us, he's like passionately in favor of the war.
He may have reasons that I don't know about.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I don't know I can't imagine what reasons Jesus would find acceptable to encourage Christians to go kill other Christians. And
he found acceptable reasons. I guess for slaughtering pagans, but yeah, I don't know. It doesn't have anything to do with the truth value of Orthodoxy, so it's very unfortunate and sad, and I'm sure they have their reasons. Yeah. But I think most of the good reasons are probably secret from the public, because That's usually
Okay.
how politics works.
So that's a couple of interesting things he said there. He said he may, the Orthodox patriarch of Russia may have some reasons. How you doing, Pius the 12th's lawyer? You are looking at let me put this thing on the screen here. You are looking at a live stream about a conversation that I had with Alex Sorin a few nights ago, and you are most welcome. What I'm talking, well, you'll get to hear it. We're talking about, Alex and I are talking in this discussion about the Patriarch of Moscow, and I'm trying to challenge him on what I think is an inconsistency in the Orthodox Church, where they will excommunicate over issues that Jesus and the apostles never said to excommunicate over, which is not necessarily wrong. There could be things that the scriptures never say to excommunicate over that we should excommunicate over. But then when it comes to things that the scriptures explicitly do say to excommunicate over, such as greed, that tends to be overlooked. And I'm giving him the example of the Patriarch of Moscow, who has at least two things going on that are excommunicable. Number one, encouraging Christians to go to war against other Christians. And even saying that, he said that, soldiers who die at war will have all their sins washed away. And that was denounced as heresy across the Orthodox world, but he doubled down on it. So that alone is excommunicable. And then the issue of greed, that he's worth something like $1 to $4 billion, lives in luxury apartments, and just like, it's not consistent with the New Testament teaching about how to use wealth and how Christians should live. And so that's what I'm trying to challenge Alex on. That's what we're talking about. And so Alex, I'll come back to your questions. I'm just going to keep going with the stream, and then it's not a very long discussion. We'll just keep going with it, and then I'll come back to your comments, Pius the 12th lawyer. So, yeah, Alex said, that the Patriarch of Moscow may have some reasons, some good reasons that he doesn't know about. And then he said something interesting. He said, usually the good reasons are kept secret from the public, which I don't think that's really how it usually goes. Usually they try to come up with what sound like good reasons to present to the public, while the real reasons, which are often bad reasons, are what's kept secret. There's often greed behind it. There's a hunger for power that's behind it. And it seems that in the case of the Patriarch of Moscow and Putin and all that, obviously, I don't think you have to be all that intuitive to get the sense that there's a desire for power motivating them, and whatever else there may be. The best reasons they have, that's what they would present to the public. They wouldn't present the really bad reasons and keep the good reasons secret. That doesn't make sense. It's usually the opposite. The other thing he said that was interesting was, I said, I can't think of any reasons why Jesus would want members of his body to go to war against other members of his body. There is no reason that Jesus would think is a good reason for Christians to go and kill other Christians. And that's just incompatible with his command to love one another as I have loved you. And in response to that, Alex started to say, well, he seemed to think there were good reasons for slaughtering pagans. And I think he might have been thinking of Old Testament stories, which of course is just completely different. And it's not hard to see what the difference is there. But we've come into a very different covenant now, and we have a very different law. There's a number of things that Israel was allowed to do or even commanded to do under the old covenant that are not acceptable for Christians under Jesus. So it doesn't work to point to how God ordered the killing of pagans at times during Israel's history, and to use that as a justification for Christians going to war against each other. Christians are not even allowed to go to war against their enemies in the new covenant, let alone each other. Should I respond to these now? Got some comments coming in from Pius. I wonder if I should respond to them now or wait. You want me to respond to these things now, or you want me to wait until after? Why don't we just keep going? This is not going to be very long, and then I'll come back to your comments. And if anybody wants to respond to Pius in the comments, then go ahead. Okay, maybe I'll respond to this one real quick. The destruction of the temple is new covenant. Do you not believe that was at the behest of Christ? Yeah, well, that was God's judgment on Israel for rejecting the Messiah. And he brought an unbelieving army, the Romans, to bring judgment on Jerusalem. But that's not a justification for Paul to kill Barnabas, because their earthly nation states that they happen to reside in are at conflict with each other. Completely different context, just a completely different thing. So God, of course, is allowed to kill whoever he wants, to bring judgment on whoever he wants. He's free to take life as he sees fit in both covenants. The question is, what has Jesus told members of his church to do? What has Jesus told his disciples to do? And his command to us is, do not resist evildoers, turn the other cheek, do good to those who hate you and abuse you, pray for those who persecute you, love each other as I have loved you. And there simply is no way to kill other Christians and be consistent with that command. What do we got here? Oh, we got somebody else in here. Someone else is saying some strange things. Thank you, Pius. Thank you. Okay, how do I get rid of that? Hold on a second. Hide current comment. Okay. All right. Hello, Sofo Chupi. Not sure what to make of your comments, but if you want to engage in some meaningful conversation, you are more than welcome, my friend. All right. Let's continue with the Alex Soren discussion.
Okay. Yeah. And the getting mixed up in politics is a like those are two issues that would have been, to my knowledge, excommunicable in the apostolic church in the first couple centuries. And then there's the issue
to do what? To have a position on a political issue?
For Christians to go to war let
We have
alone
saints that are soldiers. Saint George, the 40 martyrs of Sebast. Saint Basil in the 300s was talking about the 40 martyrs of Sebast. There are homilies on Saint George, like very early.
yeah. I'm sure we could find some stuff like that, but the position of the church early on was that Christians are not to go to war, and
Where does it say that?
Justin
I'm pretty sure
Martyr
Saint Basil's canons. Saint Basil's canons have some permissions for that.
Well, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Origen, I think Cyprian.
Origen is like a really condemned heretic.
Okay, how about Justin Martyr?
But Saint
Irenaeus,
Justin Martyr, sure, yeah, Saint Irenaeus.
Yeah, they considered Isaiah 2 to be fulfilled in the church at that time, where
Yes.
Isaiah 2.
All the nations are called to worship at the mountain of the Lord.
Yep, and they said that the law went out from Zion and taught people to beat their swords into plowshares and make war no more. And they said that it was fulfilled in the church of that day. And so that's why you have like the apostolic tradition, says that if a soldier wants to be baptized, he must commit never to use the sword again. Same with someone who governs by the sword or, wears the purple.
Think this is a matter of doctrine or dogma? You think that if...
So, yeah, I was just saying that he made a point a few minutes ago about Basil and the canons of Basil having a permission for war, and talking about the 40 martyrs of Sebast, which I wasn't aware of. Like, apparently that happened in 320, and they were soldiers who were put to death for their faith. And then the point that I go on to make is that, like, what happens in the fourth century? In the fourth century, there's a pretty fast shift, so that in the beginning of the 300s, the position of the church was that was what it had always been, that Christians do not go to war. They're not allowed to go to war. And if you're a soldier and you want to become a Christian, you don't have to stop being a soldier, but you do have to commit that you won't use the sword in battle. And that doesn't mean that every Christian up until the mid 300s or whatever obeyed that, or that but that was the position of the church. You can check that out in Apostolic Tradition, I think chapter 16. And there's a bunch of quotes from all a bunch of different, I think there's like 12, 13, 14 different pre-Nicene early church leaders and apologists who talk about this, and they're all giving the same basic perspective. Some of them talk about war, that Christians cannot go to war, partially because of Isaiah 2, that the law went out from Zion, like Isaiah 2 says, and he rebuked many nations, and they turned their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and they learned war no more. And guys like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus and Origen and Cyprian, pretty sure Cyprian as well. They interpreted that. They would point to the church of that day as the fulfillment of that prophecy, that they put the sword away for good and they make war no more. He made a comment about Origen being like a terrible heretic, and but it doesn't really matter. I mean, even if Origen was wrong about some other things, that's besides the point. The point is that what he says about this subject is in line with what the rest of them say. Same thing with Tertullian. And, so if somebody who the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church considers to be a heretic is teaching, what the rest of the church is teaching on some on some some doctrine where they're in agreement with everybody else, well then their testimony counts as evidence for what the position of the church was in that day. And Michael Garden, who wrote a book called Early Icons, which I'm about halfway through right now, he makes a similar point. He uses some evidence from Tertullian and basically says the same thing, that while Tertullian may not be a saint or whatever, he may be considered a heretic. He tries to make the case that Tertullian said some things that imply that the church was venerating icons. And so he makes the same point that I just made, that, if one of these guys who is not considered, is considered by Catholics or Orthodox to be a heretic, if they're saying the same thing everybody else is saying about some particular subject, then that evidence counts, right? So, okay, let's see what happens next. I think there was something else I wanted to comment on, but I can't remember what it was. So anyway, yeah, Saint Basil, Basil in the 300s. He's writing these canons like in the 370s, and the 40 Martyrs of Sebast is like in the 320s, and for sure by the early Joseph Smith Jr. 67. Stay white. Okay, thank you, Joseph. For sure by the late 3rd century, early 4th century, of course, there's like, there's a certain sort of laxity coming into the church on some issues. And does everyone obey the teaching of the church? No. But do we know that those 40 Martyrs of Sebast were engaging in combat? There's good chance that they were, but we don't know that. There were lots of soldiers who became Christians, joined the church in those first few centuries, who were committed to not to use the sword. They spent their lives, doing things like building roads and stuff like that. It was during the Pax Romana. So, okay, let's keep going here.
So are you a complete pacifist then? If the invaders come into your country, I mean, I understand like the Russia-Ukraine situation, that's different. Fine, let's use a different hypothetical. Isn't there a duty to defend even?
No, I don't think so. I don't think Christians can use violence
So
under
you're
any
a
certain.
complete pacifist?
I'm not a pacifist in the sense that I think God has given the sword to Caesar, to the earthly governments, to maintain some level of order in a fallen world. But I think when somebody transfers their allegiance,
but the governments use people. The governments use lay people to do that.
Yeah, I understand that's what happens today. I just don't think that that's Christ's intention. It's not how it was early on.
Of course, he doesn't want people to kill each other. Like, right. I mean, what are you getting at? You're trying to say that because there are like certain permissions for war and fighting today that the Orthodox Church.
So the conversation is getting a little bit derailed at this point from the point that I'm trying to make about the Patriarch of Moscow, and I'm going to try to rein it in here in a minute. But of course, Jesus, there's a sense in which Jesus doesn't want anyone to kill anybody, but he's given the sword to the earthly governments, Romans 13, to maintain some level of order in a world where most people are not obedient to the will of God. And so if there isn't the threat of the sword from the earthly governments, then the world will descend into chaos. And so that's why that's there. If everybody on the planet was in submission to the authority of Christ and committed to following his commands, then there would be no need for a sword. But the point is that what earthly governments do and who they go to war with and all that, like that's got nothing to do with what has Jesus commanded his soldiers to do. You know, he's got a kingdom that is distinct from the kingdoms of the world, and his command to his followers is to love their enemies, do good to them. You know, you're not supposed to go blow their head off because, you know, the government of Germany or Japan or uh, you know, America or whatever says that, you know, you need to do that for us. Jesus told you to love your enemies, to do only to someone else what you'd want them to do to you, and the Great Commission is to go make disciples of all nations, not go, you know, put a sword in them or shoot them if the government of Russia wants you to do that. So it's not really relevant, you know, what the earthly nation states are doing. The question is, what has Jesus commanded his people to do? And there's no way to reconcile killing your enemy for your earthly nation state. There's no way to reconcile that with Jesus' example and what he taught. Okay, let's keep going.
This is not the apostolic church.
No, this wasn't what I was trying to get at. I think, you know, like at the very least, Christians going to war against other Christians is you know, got to be unacceptable to Jesus. Like, he would never want Paul to kill Timothy because their earthly governments were at conflict with each other. That would be completely unacceptable to him.
There are a lot of things that God that's not preferable that happens. I mean, I used an example of that tonight. Like,
that's a little bit of a strange moment there where I made the point that, you know, at the very least, you know, whatever someone takes away from the New Testament, at the very least, we have to say that it's not okay with Jesus for Christians to kill other Christians. And then I gave an example. Of course, he wouldn't want Paul to kill Timothy because the two nations they happen to reside in are at war with each other. And kind of an awkward moment there where he didn't agree. You know, he seemed to suggest, well, you know, there might be some times where he'd want that or he'd allow that. That was kind of the vibe I got from him. You know, he couldn't just say, well, of course Jesus wouldn't want Paul and Timothy to fight with each other. You know, he couldn't get behind that statement. He sort of said, well, you know, sometimes, you know, and it's just kind of shocking that, you know, this subject is something that he doesn't seem to realize how important it is. And because he's been conditioned more by the culture that he's in, the what the Orthodox Church teaches, what the Orthodox Church does, you know, the way they approach war. They have military chaplains and Orthodox Christians all over the world who serve in the military, in you know, in spite of what Jesus said and what he did and what the early church taught. And he's more shaped by that than by the teaching and example of Christ. And so, you know, the sense that you get is that this is like, it's like he thinks this subject is a little silly. It's a little peripheral. It's not dogmatic. It's not a, you know, it's not one of the important issues to be discussing. And that's really a big problem, because this is an extremely important subject to Jesus. And the part of the reason I say that is not just the unanimous teaching of the pre-Nicene church, but when you look at Jesus' two most important public teachings, the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, this subject is prominent in both of them. It takes up a good chunk of the Sermon on the Mount. and it takes up about half of the main body of the Sermon on the Plain. And what's interesting, that's something that I realized a couple of years ago, is that when you look at what are all of the subjects that the Sermon on the Mount deals with, and then all the subjects that the Sermon on the Plain deals with, there's only a few that make it into both sermons. And this is one of them. Jesus doesn't address marriage, for example, in the Sermon on the Plain. He doesn't address how to pray, go into your room and close the door. And, he doesn't give the Lord's Prayer. He doesn't talk about lust, and stuff like that. But this issue is in both sermons, and it takes up about half of the main body of the Sermon on the Plain. So this is very important to Jesus. And if you're, if you go to a conference, for example, and there's a main speaker, and he speaks 2 times over the course of, let's say, a few days, right? And he's got a number of topics in his first presentation that he touches on, that he thinks are really important. And then in his second and last speech or presentation or whatever, he's whittled that list down to a few that he wants to touch on again. Whatever makes it into that second presentation, this is very important to him. And if you walk away from that conference thinking that, those places where those 2 presentations overlap are just not too important, this is a peripheral issue. Why are we talking about this again? You're not on the same page as that guy in your thinking. And I think that's unfortunately what happens to a lot of Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox who are very good at, making a case for their theological perspective, very good at arguing, certain doctrinal issues. But then you bring up something that Jesus thought was really important, like this issue. And it's sort of like, what? Like, why do you care about this? They might not say it like that, but that's kind of the vibe that comes off of them. And it's just an indication that, of how far removed, how far derailed the whole thing is from the heart of Christ and the things that he thought were really important. And it's scary. All right, let's keep going.
It's a command of God in Genesis that man will leave his mother and father and will be one with his wife. And in Malachi, it says God hates divorce. This is the command of God. Yet Moses permits divorce in certain circumstances. And when asked about it, Jesus said that Moses did that because your heart of hearts. So there is a binding and loosing when you have the proper authorities in play, even with commands of God like marriage.
So there he seems to be saying that he's taking the law of Moses and how Moses had a permission for remarriage, even though that's not God's ideal. And he's saying, he seems to be using that as an example to say, just like killing isn't God's ideal, sometimes it's permitted, just like, there was a permission for remarriage, but it doesn't work because Jesus says not to resist evildoers in the new covenant doesn't give any exceptions. And of course, when it comes to marriage, there were certain things that are not okay in the context of marriage under both Moses and Jesus. For example, under Moses, you're not allowed to marry a pagan woman, which is why the Israelites in Ezra chapter 10 who marry pagan women, not aware of what Moses taught, they send those women away under the leadership of Ezra and the other prophets. And in the same way, Jesus says, whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery, no exceptions. Whoever divorces their wife or their husband and marries another commits adultery. And so even if Jesus did give an exception for remarriage in Matthew 19:9, which he didn't, a lot of Protestants interpret it that way. It's a very ambiguous term, a very ambiguous verse, and we could talk about that sometime. But the fact remains that he's got certain standards for marriage that he's not willing to budge on, and so if there's no permission to, like for example, Matthew 5:32, there is no even on a Protestant position on marriage. If a man divorces his wife and she's innocent, she hasn't committed sexual immorality. There's no situation where he's allowed to do that. In the same way, there's no situation where you're allowed to resist evildoers with violence under Jesus. There's no situation where you can get punched in the face and instead of turning the other cheek, you punch that person back. Jesus never gives that exception. There's no situation where people in either covenant are allowed to engage in idolatry. In the same way, just like you can never engage in idolatry, just like you can never verbally deny Jesus to save yourself or to save your family, you can never engage in warfare or violence in the new covenant. Jesus gives a very clear example, a very clear teaching. So yeah, his example there, he tries to make a parallel there, but it doesn't really work.
Right, but there were certain things that weren't permitted, right? In regard to
idolatry, you cannot bind and loose to make that good. It's still not good even to have a divorce. Like even if it's permitted, that doesn't mean it's good. I mean, Pope St. Leo the Great talks about how yes, if a soldier comes back from war and the unalivings are justified, like even though technically there is not a sin there, you still have to go to confession because it will damage your soul to take away the life of another man. So yeah, they're not ideal situations, but I trust our Lord to judge fairly. But yeah, unless I guess you have a more specific objection, I might move on here. But
yeah. Well, my point is that the patriarch is in favor of Christians killing other Christians, and he seems to have a serious problem with greed. He's known for living in luxury, lives in luxury apartments, is worth something like $1 to $4 billion or something like that. And so these are things
that, you're going to be judged by the measure that you judge.
So that is something that I've come up against in a lot of my conversations with Protestants as well, that when you try to challenge people on some of these things Jesus taught that are really tough, they're really challenging to all of us, the response is often, don't judge. Are you judging? Don't you you're going to be judged with the measure that you which is not really dealing with the issue. If I'm right that the Patriarch of Moscow has a problem with greed, then that's a serious problem. Because Jesus puts great emphasis on this issue in the Gospels over and over and over again. He comes back to this issue of greed, the rich and the poor, the danger that the rich are in. It's hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. Sell your possessions, give to the poor. Do not store up wealth for yourselves on earth. Wherever you put wherever your wealth is, there your heart will be. These kinds of things over and over again. And that's really hard. It's really hard for people, especially in the first world, who have been able to accumulate a lot for themselves. And instead of just okay, yeah, Jesus said that, this is really serious. You're right. I mean, yeah, the guy's worth over $1 billion. That's that's a serious thing. He lives in luxury. Wow, this is something to really think about and be concerned about. Thank you for bringing this up. Instead, it's this sort of defensive, don't be judgmental now. And people don't tend to do that if you bring up some other issue, like homosexual sex, Like if the patriarch of Moscow had been caught sleeping with another man, and I said, well, this is a real big problem, he wouldn't say, you're going to be judged with the measure that you judge others, right? He'd say, amen, this is a serious problem. I'll stand right next to you and agree with you about that. But when it comes to the subject of greed, then it's often a very different thing. And often it's because the things Jesus said about greed don't just challenge people like the patriarch of Moscow, but they challenge often the person that you're trying to talk to. And I don't know where Alex is at, how he handles wealth and possessions and all that. But if he's like a lot of Christians, Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox, if he is like a lot of them, then he's going to have to explain away some of the things Jesus said, or he's going to have to deflect like this because the teachings of Christ, may challenge him personally. And again, I'm not saying he's greedy. I know nothing about Alex Soren. Perhaps he's a really generous guy, and I have no idea. I'm just saying, generally speaking, often when you're talking with Christians, whether Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox, and this subject comes up, they get into a defensive posture rather than, yeah, Jesus did say some really serious things about this. Thanks for bringing it up. We need to be really careful about this in the first world where we all have so much cash. Thank you. Thank you for challenging me on this. That's almost never the response.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we should probably
have to be able to
consider that there are things that we don't know about that are happening there. But yeah,
but we also have to be able to call something what it is, And my question.
Danny Town says it's not a Christian war; it's a secular war, and the secular government sends people that happen to be Christian. They also send Muslims, Jews, etc. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that there are a bunch of times that Christ permits killings for the greater good. I'm not saying it's all like his ideal plan, but I think he's working with man to get us there.
Yeah, I mean, if you could find that somewhere in the New Testament or in the pre-Nicene teachings of the pre-Nicene Church, but it's not there. There's no indication that Jesus allows his people, his disciples, to engage in warfare. Certainly not against other Christians. And the point that the guy brought up, that it's a secular war, that just strengthens the case that Christians should have nothing to do with it. Christians shouldn't be going to fight some secular cause, fighting alongside Muslims, killing other Christians. That's insane. It's absurd to think that Jesus, is okay with that, if you're just looking at what he actually says and what he actually did. And but I just don't think Alex has really thought through this very carefully, to no fault of his own. His attention, his focus is on the hot topics of Orthodox apologetics, the issues that Protestants often attack, iconography and whatever. But this issue just isn't something that he's had to really think about.
Okay.
What's the objection?
Well, yeah, my objection is that, for example, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6, he names greed as an excommunicable sin. It's if anyone is greedy and is named a brother, do not even eat with that person.
I mean, if it's given to him, how is that greedy? Greed talks about the state of the heart.
Okay, yeah. If someone is storing up for...
He said greed talks about the state of the heart, but you can tell, generally speaking, what's going on in someone's heart from what they're doing. What we do on the outside helps to reveal what's on the inside. And so just like, if a guy says, yeah, I love my wife so much, while he beats her and sleeps with other women, doesn't matter what, you can see what's in his heart. And in the same way, if, Jesus says, sell possessions and give to the poor and do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. And woe to you who are rich today, you've had your comfort and things like that. And a church leader is, a billionaire and living this really luxurious lifestyle, while a lot of people in who are under his authority or in other parts of the world who are Eastern Orthodox Christians don't have enough. That tells you something about what's going on in their heart. And so it's just another defensive move, to try to sort of get away from the implications of what Jesus said.
For themselves, living in luxury. Well, a lot of people don't have what they need. That's inconsistent with Jesus' teaching and example. And if someone, if a person who's worth billions and lives in luxury is not greedy, then who is?
You know how much he donates?
I don't know. Bill Gates.
That's probably an important thing to consider, right?
I don't think so. I think what's important is, what do we keep for ourselves? What kind of lifestyle do we provide for ourselves? And if it's something that's like way over the line between, if it's way more than what's actually necessary or reasonable, then we're not walking the path that Jesus walked or that he called us to. And especially if somebody's a leader, this is a really serious problem. And so my question, let's just, hypothetically, let's say he's a greedy person, hypothetically. That would put him outside of the church, right? That would be an excommunicable sin.
Again, I don't know the state of his heart, so I can't. I will not condemn Patriarch Kirill on stream. But thanks for calling in, man. I appreciate it.
All right, are we all done then?
So he didn't really answer my question there. I said, hypothetically, if he's greedy, then that would put him outside of the church, or at least he should be excommunicated from the church. Paul explicitly says not to even eat with those who are greedy and are named a brother. 1 Corinthians 5. And so, but he couldn't say, okay, yes, if he's greedy, then he should be put out of the church. He can't say that, I think, because he knows there is a problem there. And if he does say that, then he's sort of, he would be sort of denouncing him by implication. At least that's what it seems like to me. And so he just went back to the point about the state of the heart, and I'm not going to denounce, Kirill on stream and all that. It's just, well, let's just finish it up real quick. It's just about to be over.
And if you have something else to talk about, I'm not interested in talking about the finances of Patriarch Kirill. I think we've said enough.
Okay. What's strange about this to me is that, like we hear about people
I'm here to talk about dogmatics, dude. I'm sorry. I'm not.
Yeah, it's just, this is a problem that I see, is that we hear about people being excommunicated for sexual immorality or, teaching heretical doctrines. But Paul says to excommunicate for greed. But you don't ever hear about people being excommunicated for that. And that's a problem. Does that...
I don't know. I have not kept up with the recent excommunications. But again, I'm interested in the dogmatics conversation at this time. So thank you for calling in. But
okay, so that's the end of the conversation. And, just to drive that point home, what I was saying there at the end is that, Paul, like I said, explicitly says to excommunicate for greed. And it's odd that you almost never hear about someone being put out of the church because of greed. You hear about people being put out of the church, for some heretical doctrine. If somebody's decides they're a modalist, they'll be put out of a lot of churches, or or if someone's, gets an abortion, or is sexually immoral, or is getting drunk and won't stop, or if someone embraces universalism or something like that, a lot of churches will put them out. But not, you don't, I've never heard of someone being put out of a Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant church for being greedy. And so what does that mean? This is an interesting question that a friend of mine once asked. Why is that? Why don't you ever hear about people being put out of the church for greed in the first world, places like the United States, or Russia, where, at least in the case of the United States, there's a lot of money that a lot of people have, and in the case of Russia, you got some people like Kirill who've got a lot of money. Why is there never any excommunication for greed? Is it because greed is just not a problem in the first world church? Are there no greedy Christians in the United States, and so there's just no need to excommunicate anybody for this issue? Is that what it is? Or is it that this is an enormous blind spot that's going to cost a lot of people their eternal life when Jesus comes to judge the world? And I think it's probably that second one. This is a huge blind spot in all three of the churches, Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox. And needs to come on to the front burner. It needs to be center stage in the thinking of the churches and the theology of the churches. This should be this is a doctrine here. The doctrine of non-accumulation, for example, the doctrine of nonviolence. These are teachings of Christ. Doctrine means teaching. These are doctrines of Christ that he thought were really important, and they shouldn't just be brushed aside like this. All right. Well, I don't think there's anything else that I want to say, so I'm just gonna open it up. I don't think there are really any. Just open it up. Put the link in the chat here, and see if anybody wants to talk. And there might be, if there's any ortho bros or anybody watching right now and you want to come on and talk, feel free. If you want to challenge me, it's a good chance a lot more about some of the dogmatic issues that you might think are important. And I'm still learning a lot about Eastern Orthodoxy, but I don't think you need to know too much to know something's really wrong. You don't have to know a whole lot about the Protestant church to know that something's really wrong. And I think it's the same thing with Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Something's been very badly derailed. Anyway, so if anybody wants to come on, there's the link. And see what happens. Let's look at some of the comments here. Okay. Pius said, I appreciate it, man. Not trying to gotcha, genuinely asking and enjoying the stream. Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. If you want to come on, Pius, and just challenge anything I'm saying or ask me some question that's unrelated, feel free. Oh, you asked me what was your question? You said what faith persuasion are you? Good question. I am a former Calvinistic evangelical who I went through a big paradigm shift. Started with reading the Gospels and being very confused about some of the things Jesus said that didn't fit. And then I read, I started looking at some, non Calvinistic, non Lutheran perspectives on certain things Paul said. I read some of the I read a book by a guy named David Berceau back in 2016, and then got myself some early Christian writings, first, second century. Read those. Took a church theology course. Took a church history course, and got into some N.T. Wright and Paul and all that stuff, and just had a number of different. I started with the Gospels and listening to Francis Chan, and after just reading the New Testament over and over again, reading some of the early Christian writings, the church history course, we used Yusto Gonzalez's textbook, and it was just so abundantly clear to me that things have been terribly derailed throughout the course of history, and that all three of the churches are not really paying attention to what Jesus said was of most importance. And so that's why they're all willing to go to war, willing to compromise on what he said regarding marriage, have a big blind spot when it comes to money and wealth and possessions and things like that. And so my whole goal or whatever is just to encourage people to refocus on the things Jesus talked about that were important to him. And yeah. Okay. Let's see here. That's perfect. Okay. Oh, what is your name? Your name is Aramidic. That's a perfect example of why you shouldn't rely on your own understanding of what Jesus said. Sure. Yeah. I'm not, relying on my own understanding of what Jesus said. Reading the Gospels, I read the Gospels after having gone through a pretty traumatic life experience, and something about that experience really just sort of, I don't know, put me in a place where I was, there was like a door open in my mind, and I was reading the Gospels for the first time in like 3 years or so, and just all the stuff Jesus said was just really scaring me, because I saw the seriousness of the situation that we're in. And, eventually I got my hands on some early Christian writings, and those scared me pretty good, because those guys were as serious as a heart attack. And I could see that they had a much more serious and practical application of Jesus' commands, and that I would have been put out of their churches for saving up for retirement, or, taking mixed martial arts so that I could defend myself with violence, or, at the time I was divorced and planning to remarry, and that they would have told me that was a no-go. And, and not to mention just the fact that I was terribly distracted by all kinds of things of the world, movies and TV shows, and trying to improve my physique so that I could look good at the pool and stuff like that. These are things that Jesus, I think we all know, didn't think were important. And worse than that, not just distraction, but detrimental to the spiritual journey. So I realized that I was in big trouble, and I don't really see I don't really see that either the Catholic or Eastern Orthodox Church are real serious about those things either. And so it doesn't seem to me like there's this one sect or, thank you, Araminic. Peace be with you as well. It just doesn't seem to me that there's this one sect or group that we can just go to and, trust that they're gonna put us on the narrow path that leads to life. Fortunately, I think the situation is a lot more messy and complicated than that. Good evening, Renetka. How are you? So, anybody want to talk? Anybody got any questions or comments, challenges, objections? It appears not. Well, may God bless Alex Soren, and I think he's a really, really smart guy. And I hope that he will become an apologist for the principles and commands of Christ, and that he will call his church to repentance on some of these things Jesus said and the example that he left us. It's a lot more important than, whether or not they used incense or whether or not they had divine liturgy just the way the Orthodox has it today. I don't think the Day of Judgment is going to be really about that kind of stuff. Devin says, what's your thoughts on the practice of catechumens? Someone learning about the faith before baptizing versus baptizing right away. Yeah, well, I think, the biblical example is that people should be baptized right away. But I think, under the leadership of the apostles, that was happening regularly. But I kind of assume that, the apostles and the men that were apostolic men who were baptizing under them could get a sense about somebody, that somebody was of sober mind and they had come to a place of, like it says in Acts 2, they were pricked in the heart and they said, brothers, what shall we do? Like they come to a place of uncompromising obedience. We're ready to do whatever it takes. Just tell us what Jesus said. And when someone comes to that place, I think they're ready for baptism. But I think today it's not quite that simple. And a lot of times someone might say that, but they don't have an understanding of what they're really getting into. They don't understand the commitment that they're getting into, because what they've seen is a very casual Christianity, whether in Eastern Orthodoxy or Catholicism or Protestantism, that doesn't require a lot of us. And anyway, at some point along the line, I think in the 2nd century, they started doing longer periods of time, and I'm not saying that I think with some people that's necessary. Some people are just not ready, and you need to continue talking to them and teaching them and helping them to understand what it means to be a Christian and helping them to understand why they're not ready. And sometimes you meet someone and they're ready right away. They are ready to take up their cross. They're ready to die. They are ready to turn away from whatever sins, whatever addictions, whatever. They're ready to do whatever it takes, while others are, hesitant or just don't really understand yet, and you kind of have to work with them. And it's not a one size fit all. I don't think it makes sense for everyone to get baptized the same day. And I don't think it makes sense to have this thing, okay, everyone's got to go through 2 years of being catechized. Some people are ready a lot sooner than 2 years. Some people might, you tell them the gospel, try to teach them, and they're not going to be ready until 10 years later. Anyway, yeah, I just think there shouldn't be this one size fits all thing. I think we have to take it on a case by case basis and feel our way through it and figure out when somebody's ready. Okay. Daniel said, it's interesting that love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah. Often inside of the professing church. Yes, Chris, someone should believe before being baptized. Aromatic, I'm a cradle Eastern Orthodox, and I disagree with you. The Eastern Orthodox Church isn't as legalistic as you might want it to be when it comes to worshiping and liturgy. It's spiritual. Okay. Yeah, I'm not accusing them of being legalistic. And of course, I know there's a lot of like good things that Eastern Orthodox hold to and teach, and good principles that they teach. I'm not saying the whole thing is rotten through and through or anything like that. And there's probably, my experience with Catholics and Orthodox, which is very limited, is that you don't get the same thing from every person that you talk to. And I know that there's not perfect agreement in the Orthodox Church, on everything with everybody. I was reading this article from the it's called the Volos Theological Academy, the Volos Academy of Theological Studies, which is like a prominent Orthodox academy or whatever, and there's lots of theologians and professors and bishops who are supportive of it and like the things that they put out, but there's a lot of more conservative Orthodox who think it's too liberal and progressive or something. And so, yeah, I just think it's just kind of depends on who you're talking to. But if you want Bible study, Aromatic says, if you want Bible study, there are groups for that. We all believe that we should know the Bible, study the Bible, and live. Yeah, I know. I think that's true. And like people in Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox circles will all say those kind of things. The question is of what actually happens in reality in daily life, and like how much do we walk, rather than talk. And like in the Protestant churches that I was in, we used to talk a lot about carrying your cross, denying yourself and carrying your cross. We all understood that principle. And, but what actually happened when we left the Sunday service was not that. It was not cross carrying, generally speaking. Not that nobody ever made any sacrifices or did any hard things, but generally speaking, we were all, I think, living a pretty casual life, not much cost associated with our Christianity. Most of the suffering that we went through were things that anyone will suffer through just as a result of being on the planet. A loved one dies or somebody gets sick, but no one was carrying a cross in the sense that they were suffering because of what Jesus said about, self-denial, or something like that. Aromatic says, I understand your skepticism, and all I can really say is you need to walk the walk to truly understand it. You mean like I would need to become Orthodox to really know what's going on in the Orthodox Church? I mean, I totally agree with you. We need to walk the walk. I think what Jesus calls us to is a daily devotion to Him, that His mission and His message is priority number one, and everything else, has to go off to the side. Not that we don't work a job, right? But we don't have time for, binging on Netflix. We don't have time for sports and, hobbies and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's wrong to get exercise. I'm not saying it's wrong for a group of Christians to play some kind of sport together for the purpose of exercise and some clean fun. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying we have to turn away from the lifestyle of entertaining ourselves and prioritizing things that we think are fun. Those things need to go to the side, and we need to prioritize and plan out the mission of Jesus, between prayer and evangelism and trying to help the needy and discipling each other and studying the Word of God. There's not going to be much time for other things. And so we're going to have to put down the video games and the, the movies and the graphic novels and whatever we've been doing with our free time that we enjoy, but doesn't really have anything to do with the kingdom of God. Those things just you have to put those things down, Okay. Something like that, but you need to learn the religion, even if you don't convert, to understand how much the faith is worth. Yeah. I'm in a state right now, Aromatic, of learning about Eastern Orthodoxy and how they think, and not that I don't know anything about it, but I'm definitely learning about it. And right, Daniel says, giving up your Sunday morning is carrying your cross these days. Right. Yeah, if that's the standard, then we're in great shape. We don't really have anything to worry about. But if Jesus wants us to go all in for Him, then we should be very concerned. The way I think about it is like what I think He's calling us to is sort of like, when like a lot of people in churches go on mission trips from time to time, where they take like a 2-week period of time and they're like, okay, we're just going to totally focus on reaching out to this people group or serving in this area, even though often they then go there and do a lot of touristy stuff. But let's just say they didn't do any touristy stuff. They just went there and they just hit the ground running, and they served and they shared their faith until they left. Just 2 weeks of, mission of Jesus comes first. We're in prayer. We're serving Him. We're serving our neighbor. We're about the business of the kingdom. And then they go home, and then it's back to, okay, my hobbies and my job and, family's going on vacation, and we're going to do some fun things on the weekend. And it's just sort of like, you had this 1-2 week period where you really prioritize this. And now it's sort of like back to, the things we want to do are the priority again. And Jesus kind of gets, Sunday morning and maybe a little bit of time during the week here and there. But what if you just went on a mission trip and just never came back? And what if you went on that mission trip where you live? You didn't get on a plane and go somewhere else. You just became a missionary where you are now. And I understand you need to work a job, but what you do with your free time and how you conduct yourself at work, all of that stuff radically changed so that it was like you're on a mission trip, and someone comes to you and they're like, hey, let's go, whatever, do this fun activity just because it's fun. It's like, Well, that sounds fun, but I have a mission to attend to. I've got more important things going on. And yeah, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying this is some kind of rigid rule where we constantly have to be running around like a chicken with its head cut off. I'm just talking about our lifestyle. Tell me, Tree Cutter said, I don't need to know all religions to reject them. That's a good point. Thank you for your support, Aromatic. Daniel said, I was talking to a guy at work today about storing up treasures and always putting your needs over others. And he said it's all about perspective. Okay. What do you think he meant by that? What does that mean exactly? Just sort of relativizing it, like kind of different for every person. Whatever seems right to you is right for you, kind of thing. Well, while Daniel's writing that response, anybody want to come on and talk? Could put the thing I'll put the link in the chat again, just in case somebody wants to come on, talk. I still don't know how to pin the link. How do I pin it so that it stays there and doesn't, work its way up the chat? I don't know how to do that. All the big YouTube guys know how to do that. I can't figure it out. Anybody know how to do that? Okay. Oh. Okay, Daniel, you said he's not wrong. If you don't like Jesus' commands and how they apply, you just have to change your perspective to see things working the way you want them, areas of Jesus' way. So you're saying if you don't like what he says, you have to change your perspective. You have to get in line with his perspective. Is that what you're saying? Okay, tap on the comment. Thank you, Delmy Tree Cutter. Tap on the comment. Okay, I tapped on it, and it's not doing it. All it does, if I tap on it, all it does is put it on the screen there. You can't pin from StreamYard. Oh, you pin from YouTube. Okay. That's the answer. Wow, I am completely clueless. All right, so I got to go on YouTube. Let me just try this right now. So I got to go on YouTube. I got to go on my own live stream, right? Got to go on my own live stream and pin this thing. Okay. Wow. Make me a moderator. I will pin it for you. Okay. How do I do that? When I click on your comment, it says delete comment, put user in timeout, ban user, and delete their comments. How do I make you a moderator? How am I this clueless? Okay. Going to my channel. How do I make you a moderator? Tell me, Tree Cutter. Thank you, Aromatic. You can only do it from YouTube. Just pin it. Okay, I'm going to YouTube, going onto my live, and I think this is gonna like wow. Weird. Okay. Here I am. This is so weird. What a weird. Okay. Okay, let's stop that. Okay, now I gotta wait for the chat. The chat's loading on YouTube. Can we do it? Oh. Okay, the chat loaded. Okay, now I pin it from YouTube. And okay, how do I? Oh, okay. The three little dots there, and wow, this thing is going real slow. Pin message. Oh, whoops. Wow, this thing is slow. Overriding the system with all these tabs or all this streaming and buffering. Okay, pin message. Got it. I think I got it. There it is. It's pinned. Okay. I have graduated to a new YouTube status. Okay. Oops. Forgot that you can only. Oh. Okay. Now click the message. You got it. Okay. There it is. Well, thanks for helping me figure that out, guys. Now I'm a real YouTuber. Well, if nobody wants to come on, I suppose I'll go. Now that I figured it out, I can go. Anybody want to come on? Anybody want to come on and own me? This must be pretty pathetic to watch. Somebody like Alex Soren, you know, if he ever checked out my live. That's funny. All right, well, here I go. I guess I'm gonna take off. God bless everybody, and God bless Alex Soren. May he recenter on these things Jesus said that are so fundamental. Oh, somebody wants to come on the stage. Delmy Tree Cutter. Thank you, Jeremiah. Here we go. We're talking with Delmy Tree Cutter. How you doing, my friend?
Jesus is Lord.
Jesus is Lord.
How are you, bro?
I'm okay. Thanks for your help.
Yeah, am I echoing? Because I'm not wearing my headset, so sometimes it echoes.
I do not hear any echo.
Okay, sometimes it does. So what was this thing you went to? Like, what was this channel?
It was Alex Soren, who is sort of an up and coming Eastern Orthodox. What's that?
Oh, now it's echoing. Let me turn my microphone off as you speak.
Okay. Yeah, he's a up and coming Eastern Orthodox apologist. Very, very smart guy. Very sharp, very knowledgeable, and he does really well in his debates. Adelmo. God bless you, Adelmo. Thank Thanks for being here. He does very well in his debates, and he often does live streams with a guy named Stephen DeYoung, who's an Orthodox priest, I think, or maybe a bishop. Yeah, so I went on his live, and I just was trying to basically say, like, why doesn't I was talking about the Patriarch of Moscow, who I think clearly has an issue with greed, and he's clearly not in step with the teaching of Jesus and encouraging the war in Ukraine, and that these are excommunicable things. And why is it that people will be excommunicated in the Eastern Orthodox Church for things Jesus and the apostles never said explicitly to excommunicate over, but things like greed, which Paul explicitly says to excommunicate over, those things are overlooked, and that was kind of the point that I was making. And if greed is excommunicable, which it is according to Paul, then it should put somebody out of the church just as much as teaching Arianism would. Okay, Stephen DeYoung is a priest. Thank you for that clarification. So that's what happened, and I spoke with Alex for like 13 or 14 minutes, and he interrupted me a fair bit, but he did a better job of listening than Ryan from needgod.net did, and I think, and I think it's just the subject that I was bringing up is just not one that he's, it's not territory that he's really familiar with. I think it's not something he's really used to thinking about and talking about. So he kind of just didn't want to go there,
Yeah, this is a time that there's so much. I think there's a lot of people that have taken upon themselves to be teachers, especially with the internet ability to be reaching the masses. And then when you see a lot of these channels, and it gets very dangerous, because especially if you have a big following people after you.
Yeah.
And then, I guess if you're trying to teach the things that Jesus said, I don't think it will give you a big following. And especially if you already built up your channel on things that are not clearly what Jesus taught, I think you might lose a lot of those people if you start accepting those things. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. But maybe not. Maybe, somehow God is allowing these people to have a big following. So when they do accept the teachings of the Lord, they can get an influence reaching a lot of people. I don't know. It's just so hard nowadays, like everybody wants to be right? And that includes you and I. Like we want to be right. We don't want to be wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong. And the problem is when we accept what we think is right, but it's clearly against what Jesus said. Like I try to tell people, I fall short a lot, but I cannot justify my falling shorts with the teachings of Jesus. I have to say I have disobeyed him when I did something that he clearly told me not to do in his words, and not try to justify what I've done with, but look at this, look what the Bible says regarding this, and always like like what you said about the war, like it when Jesus said love your enemies, I believe he meant that. Now I don't think it's possible to love your enemies and go to war against them at the same time. And so then what do I have to do? I have to justify it with David and Samson and Peter had a sword and
Right.
this and that. And but the good thing, I was asking a friend of mine, um, said, oh, all right, so how do we explain to someone that Jesus really meant what he said? And this brother said, well, you look at the apostles, right? And see what the apostles understood Jesus saying. But not only that, you look at the life of Jesus himself and see what he did regarding what he said. And I believe the best example of what to do when there is enemies and hypotheticals that we can clearly see in the life of Jesus. What if someone breaks into your house and is stealing your stuff? Well, Jesus had a thief stealing from his bag. How did Jesus treat that thief? Jesus knew people were stealing, so Jesus knew that thief on the cross and his friend or the other one. How did Jesus deal with that? Did he go on a campaign against evildoers and helping the Romans take their lives and get them crucified? Or he loved them, like he called Judas his friend. Said, friend, are you betraying me? Knowing that he was a thief, knowing that he was betraying him, and he did that. Or the enemies that were persecuting him and actually got to have him crucified. Even though we knew he could have stopped that with 12 legions of angels. But how did Jesus deal with his enemies? You know, and that's so easy to see. And then we don't have to be trying to put the apostles against Jesus or trying to go, well, but look at David and look at, you know, Gideon and Samson and all these warriors from the old covenant and try to justify that we have to do the same thing now. Anyways, I'm just saying a lot of things.
Yeah. It's amazing how easy it is. Oh, I think you got to mute yourself. It's amazing how easy it is to see that, and yet how hard it is for so many people to see it at the same time. Like how hard it was. I could not see that for a long time. It's so obvious. It's right there. You know, Jesus has all authority and power and can crush everyone anytime he wants to. And he lets these people mutilate him and beat him and spit on him and hang him up naked in public. And he can stop it anytime he wants. And if that's all we knew, if he never said anything about this, if he never taught anything about this, that would be enough for us to come to a firm stance on nonviolence, just because we want to be his disciples. We want to be students of his life, walking in his footsteps. And it's just sort of kept hidden from a lot of people today. And at the same time, I think it's kind of people know. They know in the back of their minds, you know, and it's far back enough and deep down enough in their minds that they can ignore it and just go with whatever the church is teaching today, you know. But anyway, thank you for your thoughts. There's a couple of comments that just came in here while we were talking. One says from ND Extreme Pro, it's not something he can really talk about, Alex Soren. He isn't in the Russian Orthodox Church authority structure, so has no dog in the fight. And then he said, at the same time, bishops are the ones who can deal with other bishops, not laymen. Right. But, you know, we should be able to call a spade. You know, if someone is saying, you know, that it's okay for two Christian men to marry each other, then we should be able to just say that person's wrong and that's heresy, and that person should be, under church discipline or put out of the church, or they certainly shouldn't be in any kind of authority. We should be able to say that. And he couldn't or wouldn't say that about the Patriarch of Moscow, even though he's clearly derailed from the teaching of Christ. And by the way, Eastern Orthodox theologians and leaders and bishops and stuff all over the world have denounced Kirill's teaching. Kirill taught that soldiers who die in war have all their sins washed away because of their sacrifice. And that has been denounced by Orthodox all over the world as heresy. But he's still in his position, which is strange. It's because, he's got Putin's protection and backing and all that. But yeah, it's strange that Alex couldn't even say, yeah, there might be a problem there, Okay. Well, I tried to join, but my browser is blocking StreamYard. Now that I know what your concern is with the Patriarch of Moscow, I am Greek Orthodox, so that's a different jurisdiction. Yeah, different jurisdiction. Okay, tell me tree cutter's back. Oh. Yeah, so would you, Arometic, would you be willing to say that the Patriarch of Moscow should be put out of the church, should be removed from his position? You willing to say that as a Greek Orthodox? Feel free to keep trying to come back on. Tell me. Oh, sorry, you can't join, Arometic. Okay, ND check. Once again, a different authority structure. Alex has been given a blessing to talk about certain things. This one is not one of them. Yeah, but, Jesus is the authority ultimately. And if someone's outside of the teaching of Christ, if someone's teaching against what Jesus said, then if we're loyal to Jesus, we need to be able to say that's wrong. And that person needs to repent. And I'm sure, if it was some other subject, if and again, Orthodox Christians across the world who are not under the Patriarch of Moscow's authority, they're not in the Russian Orthodox Church, have denounced what he said as heresy. So, shouldn't ever have to sort of be afraid to just call something evil. If something's evil, then it's evil, regardless of who's saying it or doing it. Okay. Well, no, this is a political thing, and actually, I don't know if you're aware, but the Patriarch of Moscow and the Patriarch of Constantinople. Yes, I'm aware of that. The Patriarch of Constantinople recognized the autonomy of the church in Ukraine. The Patriarch of Moscow responded. This is just mind-blowing. When you think about the principles of the New Testament, he responded by of saying, I won't pray for him anymore in the diptychs. And, my people are not allowed to take the sacrament from, in his jurisdiction. This is just so far removed from the mind of the apostles and the mind of the Spirit, it's not that we like to talk about it, nor should we, but there is a conflict between the patriarchs. Yeah. and it's worse than just like a disagreement. It's pretty intense, the disagreement. And something else that I was reading about was that or doing some research on, the Patriarch of Moscow sent people into Africa. When Theodore II, who's the Patriarch of Alexandria, he also recognized the authority of the church in Ukraine, and so in retaliation, the Patriarch of Moscow sends people into Africa to offer salaries to the clergy under the Patriarch of Alexandria, if they would come over to the Russian church. He offered salaries and education opportunities to them. And none of the bishops took it, because the bishops have a salary and they're, well provided for. But something like 30% of the priests who are black natives, the bishops are Europeans, generally speaking, and the priests are natives, black natives who often have families, and they get a $50 to $100 stipend, something like that. This is from what I read. I need to check some of this stuff. So something like 30% of the priests took the bribe, or I don't know what else to call it, and went over to the Russian church. I mean, this is just like this is the kind of childish stuff that even most unbelievers know is ridiculous, and it's happening at the highest levels of authority in the Orthodox Church. And Alex would be out of line by voicing his opinion on this the same way I am. I have been an Eastern Orthodox my entire life, and I wouldn't do it. So, like, if the Patriarch of Moscow started teaching that two men can get married, like, you wouldn't feel like you can just say, no, that's wrong. He's a heretic and should be put out of his position. I mean, how can that be right? We have to be loyal to Jesus first. And if someone's saying something that's not true and that isn't right, then we need to be willing to take whatever cost comes with saying what's true. Right? I'm not Eastern Orthodox, and I wouldn't presume to tell them how to run their church. What authority do I have to do that? Okay, like, but do you have the ability to tell when something is evil? And can you say that? Like, again, if okay, Kenneth Copeland, health and wealth preacher, clearly has gotten filthy rich off of people that he's manipulated. Would you be unwilling to just call that what it is? Would you be willing to like, if the Pope were to affirm gay marriage, would you feel like, I just don't have the authority to just say that that's wrong? Right? I mean, we have to be able to do that, or else truth loses out, right? We have to be able to say, okay, Jesus is my ultimate authority, and if someone's saying something that I know is out of line with what he said, then I'm not gonna be afraid to say what's true, Right, on the off chance that would happen, it wouldn't go to me for approval. It would be a big deal. Just wouldn't happen. Yeah. I mean, of course, it wouldn't go to you for approval, but if you're talking with an unbeliever, for example, who's like, how can they do this? How can they be teaching this? Would you be willing to say, well, hey, look, that's not the teaching of Jesus. What he's saying is wrong. Or would you be like, oh, I can't really say anything about this. My lips are sealed because, I'm not under his authority, or I don't have the right to, like something's really wrong there. Why do you have to be able to accuse to the world on the internet these leaders? Where is that in Jesus' lectures? Well, I guess my point is that we have to be willing to say that something which is evil, and Jesus did that. Paul says to rebuke an elder openly if he's in some kind of sin, says that to Timothy. And I just think like there's a lot of inconsistency here when it comes to things that are not considered to be a big deal, in human culture, like greed. People are often, don't want to come out and say something about it. But when it comes to the sins that we consider to be really bad, like abortion or same-sex marriage, then we'll feel more freedom to say, hey, this is wrong, because we're not going to take any heat for that. I think the real problem here is that if someone was to voice, if someone was to talk about the Patriarch of Moscow's problem with greed, they're going to take heat for that. Whereas if he were teaching that two men can get married, well, now you can denounce that safely because everyone's going to agree with you. You're not going to take any heat for that. And so I think that's how it is with some of the things Jesus said. If you take a firm stance on nonviolence, if you take a firm stance on greed, and if some church leader is teaching something that's not in line with what Jesus said, and you say, no, that's not right, you're going to be in the minority. You're going to be backed into a corner. People are going to come after you. And that's why I think, we are often hesitant to talk about these things. Okay, let's see here. Devrod, where does authority come from? One leader, bishop laying hands on another, or are there more ways? Yeah, well, that's a good question. And, the Catholic and Orthodox would say it comes from apostolic succession. But when you look closely at what the early church said about apostolic succession, they actually pointed to their lines of succession in order to demonstrate that they had the truth. And they said, it's clear, in like First Clement and some of the things Irenaeus says, if somebody who's got apostolic succession ceases to teach the truth, they're not somebody we should listen to anymore. Whoever is saying what's true is the person people should listen to. And authority, I think, ultimately comes down to truth. If the Patriarch of Moscow is saying what is true, then people should listen to him. If he is saying what is false, then people should reject what he's saying. This is very much like some of the decisions that the Pope makes. We can't necessarily blame the Catholic lady for this decision. Okay. Oh, the Catholic laity. I was like, who's the Catholic lady? Sure. Yeah. I'm not trying to go after the laity. Although I think, you know, I think there are going to be a lot of laity on the day of judgment who read what Jesus said, and they're like, something ain't right here, but I'll just go whatever the bishop says, or go with whatever the pastor says. And yeah, I'm just laity, I'm just whatever. I don't have any authority, and that's not going to fly when it comes time to look Jesus in the eye. They might not be judged as harshly as those who are in authority as teachers, but I think there's a lot of people who are going to have to stand before him, and he's going to know you knew something was wrong with this and you went with it, and you shouldn't have. And it's going to be bad. Jesus did that to their face, not behind their back, halfway across the world in a different language. Okay. Well, if I could talk to the Patriarch of Moscow, I would be happy to say these things. But yeah, I just don't think that we have our hands tied in this way, where we're just not allowed to talk about these things. And I just don't think anyone's going to be consistent about that. I'm sure if there were other things he were saying that were just like really evil, in your opinion, you'd reach a point where you'd be willing to say, yeah, this is wrong. I don't think it's wrong to critique what someone's teaching. A lot of the Orthodox who have denounced his teaching as heretical didn't say it to his face, but they did it for the sake of truth. They did it to defend the truth, and I think our motivation is really what's important there. If we're talking about something because we really care about God's glory and his joy and the well-being of those who may be who might be being misled, then I don't see a problem with it. Okay, let's see. He also told them to do what the Pharisees said, but the Pharisees were the name for the judges and teachers at the same time, not one person. Okay. Yeah. He said they sit in Moses' seat, so do whatever they tell you. Don't do what they do. So I take him to be saying, do whatever they tell you, and as far as they're telling you what Moses said. But he clearly didn't have any respect for the rabbinic traditions, that Moses didn't give. And he was willing to call them out. Thank you, Aramedic. Well, unless somebody else wants to come on. Yeah, let's just like what John just said, let's be careful to humble ourselves. Have to constantly be on the lookout for pride and arrogance. In every conversation. The bishops now sit in that same seat, so you do what the bishops say, not what they do, and the bishops deal with the other bishops. Well, I guess I would approach it the same way, like do what the bishops say in as much as they say what Jesus said. But anytime they say something that's not in line with what Jesus said, you have to disregard that. But something about that passage that I think is important to think about is that, Jesus there, if you take it the way I think Catholics and Orthodox tend to take it, that hey, these guys were in the in these seats of authority, and Jesus affirms their authority, and that they should listen to these guys, but Jesus in that very passage says that these people that he's referring to are making their disciples twice a child of hell as they are themselves, and that they close the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. They don't go in themselves, and they hinder those who would have entered. And so if you take it the way the Orthodox and Catholics do, then Jesus is basically telling us here that people in places of authority that he recognizes can lead you to hell, that they will make you twice as much of a child of hell as they are themselves. And that just, something isn't right there. Jesus can't be saying, yeah, I want you to listen to someone who's got apostolic succession, even if they're going to make you twice as much a child of hell as they are. And even if listening to them gets you thrown into the lake of fire, that's just not a tenable way to interpret that passage. Paul and Jesus had authority that we don't have. When we read the Bible, we aren't the disciples, we are the sheep they were watching out for. Yeah, that's absolutely true. True apostolic succession will have. Yeah, and just so you guys know, like I don't know what the answer is to this messy situation we're in. I know what the answer isn't. I don't know what the answer is, but I know what it isn't. And I just think we're in a real mess. And you can't just choose, okay, Catholic, Orthodox, or some Protestant sect. You can't say, okay, I'm going to decide, that this is the right one to go to based on my research and my reasoning, and then just go there and just trust that, okay, I can relax now. They're going to point me in the right direction. They're going to teach me the right things. It doesn't work like that. You can't just go somewhere and say, all right, as long as I'm here and in submission to these leaders, things are going to end up well for me. The path is narrow and difficult, and only a few find it. And that reality means that you can't just go listen to the guy who's dressed in black and he'll make it so that you end up in the right place in the end. It's not that simple. Okay, please do us a favor and don't love us together with the Catholics. We don't share the same dogma and doctrine. I understand that you're not the same as Catholics, but I think, and this is just what I honestly think. I think Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox are a lot more alike than they realize. They have sharp theological disagreements, but they all they all lack a serious approach to Jesus' teachings and commandments. And so they're all willing to go to war, store up treasures, make provisions for remarriage, get involved in, political wars and cultural wars. And, and they're all being heavily influenced by something outside of the teaching of Jesus and the apostles. Protestants say sola scriptura, but let's be honest, they're being heavily influenced by Martin Luther and John Calvin and others who have gotten into their brains and affect the way they interpret the scriptures. And Catholics and the Orthodox admittedly are being influenced by all kinds of things outside of the scriptures. But none of them are just, okay, hey, let's get back to what did Jesus say? What did he do and what did he actually say? And let's not explain this stuff away. And let's allow Jesus and the apostles to correct our theology, correct our traditions if it needs it. Let's let them teach us what are the things that are most important, what are the things we should be emphasizing and talking about all the time. And what I've found is that in all three, Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox, the things that Jesus liked to talk about, the things that he emphasized as of most important, they're just not really a big topic of discussion, and I think all three of them have that in common. They all want to talk about the theological controversies and icons and the filioque and the papacy and Mary and all this stuff that Jesus didn't talk about. These things were not on the lips of Jesus. These are theological controversies that we think are really important today. But all three of them need to take a step back and say, what did the master think was really important? And let's put these things aside that we like to argue about, and let's get back to what this thing was always supposed to be about. He gave them the corrective, right? Do what they say, not what they do, and trust Jesus as the best judge. Okay. Yeah, I think he meant do what they say in as much as they are saying what Moses said, right? But some of these men would have told people, they would have said, hey, if you give your money to us, then you don't have to do anything for your parents in their old age. That's what they were saying, and Jesus obviously would not tell us to listen to that. This is one big assumption there. Why do you assume these things aren't that important? Well, okay, yeah, some of them are important. Like, Christology is important. Trinitarian theology is important. But if we want to talk about what's most important, I think the way to find out what those things are to go to the master and look at what he said and say, what is he always wanting to talk about? What are the things he keeps coming back to again and again and again? And it's not proper Christology. It's not, stuff about Mary. It's not icon veneration. It's not, that's not what's on his lips. It's not what's on his mind. I'm not saying he doesn't say anything that has implications for some of that stuff. Of course, he says things that have implications for Christology. But when he talks, like when you look at what's the thrust of his teaching, what are the main themes? What are the things that you can see are on his mind? It's not these theological issues, and that's what I mean. Okay, Daniel, he just said because Jesus didn't talk about them. Oh, okay. Now, how are you making those things the highest importance? I mean, I think it's intuitive, you know, if you spend time with someone and you listen to what they talk about, you know, and there are certain things that they repeat and come back to over and over again, it would be absurd to say, okay, the things that are really important to him are the things he didn't say anything about. You know, that's just intuitive. And so if Jesus is constantly reminding his disciples about the need to be humble and to lower themselves, if he's talking about the importance of marriage a lot, if he's talking about the need to love your enemies, if he's talking about the need to keep his commandments, if he's talking about you know, the importance of avoiding arrogantly judging people, you know, um, if he's talking about wealth and the danger that there is to rich people, and you know, and over again he's coming back to that, you know, then like it would be strange for us to say, okay, these things aren't really all that important, these are peripheral issues, you know, we should give them some thought, but really we should be thinking about Christology and, you know, what's the right way to think about Mary, and is she the God bearer or is she the Christ bearer? We really need to figure this out. This is really important to God. You know, that's not logical. That's not that doesn't make sense. You know. Um, Aromatic, thanks for saying that. Most of the faithful don't give a lot of thought to all this online controversy. Yeah, it's a good point. You know, there's a lot of people around the world who are faithfully serving Jesus, and they don't have an internet connection, and you know, they're walking with him, pleasing to him, useful to him, wherever they are. And we should be careful not to think that you know, online controversy is where we should focus, or like, you know, somebody like me should be careful not to think that you know, I'm right in the center of what's the most important things that are going on the planet or something, because I'm online. You know, I'm yeah, I appreciate that. Appreciate that warning. Yeah, of course, it's important to talk about these things, and these are all important subjects. And all right, from the Protestant perspective, but you're dealing with people. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the mindset is different, and that's important to be aware of. And yeah, I mean, over the last few weeks, I've been thinking about Eastern Orthodoxy. Like, there've been a couple times where I'm like starting to get into their mindset a little bit, and like can kind of say, okay, like I can kind of see what it would be like if I thought like this and if I held this position. And it's a little scary actually to do that, you know, because you start to feel like, whoa, you know, you're putting on somebody else's shoes and trying to think like them, and that can be a little bit scary because you're like, okay, you know, I don't agree with this, so let me rein myself in here and you know, get back to the way I actually think about things. But we have to be able to do that to some degree, you know, in order to think through these things objectively, and that's a challenging and scary thing to do. I experienced some of that back in 2021 when I was first thinking seriously about Eastern Orthodoxy, because a friend of mine was going in that direction, and I kind of had to start to learn about it, and you know, and I could feel the pull, I could feel the appeal, I could feel why this makes sense to people, you know, and not easy. It's not easy to do that. Well, I guess maybe I'm gonna go. I hope that I conducted myself here in a honorable way, guys. I know some people are raising some objections, and I hope nobody felt like I just brushed them off. And I know Orthodox Catholics, have some really strong points to make, and so don't want to come off like I think it's just sort of silly and not worth thinking seriously about. All right, well, I guess I'm gonna go unless somebody joins the queue in the next couple of seconds. Thank you so much for being here, guys. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And Devrod, thanks for your comments. And I to the Orthodox, and maybe there was a Catholic person here, I'm not sure. Please feel free to come back, and thank you for taking the time to engage. And if it's not a little contentious, no thinking was done. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, may God help us all to walk the narrow path that Jesus called us to, and to humble ourselves, like John was saying. And may he help us to be faithful to him, pleasing to him, useful to him. May he help us to be salt and light. May he help us to be ready for the day of judgment, which could arrive very soon. Good night.